Hello, and welcome back to Lacrim Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you're drawn to dark, haunting stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now settle in, clear your mind, let the outside world slip away, and let's begin. Story 1. It was almost 1 in the morning, and my boyfriend George was blasting music through all 4 open windows of his old Toyota Camry. It was some rock band with a name I could never pronounce right, Polyphia, or something close to that. The night air coming in was cold in that early April way, but the heater was running full blast too. I leaned forward and adjusted the vent so the hot air hit just right and mixed with the cold wind from outside. I know that sounds stupid. My parents always said if you are cold, roll the windows up. And if you want fresh air, turn the heat off. But something about cold night air mixing with car heat always felt perfect to me. It woke you up and relaxed you at the same time. George and I had just gone to see the new Mario movie and did not really want the night to end yet. So we were driving around town before he took me home. My parents would not have been thrilled if they knew how late I was out. But that was part of being 17 and trying to stretch every good moment a little longer. We were both seniors in high school. We had met in chemistry, which felt embarrassingly cliché when I said it out loud, and we had only been dating a few months. Everything still felt new and exciting. We could talk for hours and often did. Sometimes I would lie awake at night thinking about graduation and how we would not be going to the same college. He was staying local for a tech program. I was hoping to go across the country and aim for a strong pre-med track. That thought scared me more than I like to admit, so I had started treating every drive, every date, every little stupid joke as something worth holding on to. I had gotten lost in that thought again when George glanced over and caught me staring at him. "What?" he asked, smiling in that bright way that still made my stomach twist up. "Nothing," I said, smiling back, and leaned my head on his shoulder for a second. A little ahead, I saw flashing red lights, and then one of the railroad crossing arms dropped down in front of us. George slowed to a stop, and we sat there while a freight train thundered past. The whole car shook with the noise. I remember sitting there watching the train blur by in the dark and thinking, very simply, God, I loved him. When the crossing finally opened again, George drove over the tracks and toward an intersection farther into town. That was when I saw the gas station. It was so bright it looked unreal, like someone had planted a stadium in the middle of a quiet street. White light spilled over the pavement and nearby buildings, harsh and clean and almost too strong to look at directly. George squinted. "What's that?" "What, Otto's? You haven't been there yet?" He frowned. "No. Wasn't that a Casey's like a week ago?" "Maybe 2 weeks," I said. It changed fast. It was a whole thing. Otto's, the automated convenience store. I went there with Alice and a couple of other people. It's actually kind of cool. There's a robot. He looked at me with immediate interest. A robot. Like Wall-E? He loved Wall-E. Loved that movie in the sincere, childlike way only George could love something without embarrassment. I laughed. "No, not like Wall-E. Just come inside and I'll show you." I did not really have to convince him. He was already turning into the lot. As we pulled in, he lifted one hand over his eyes like a visor. "Why is this place so bright?" he said. "Did they steal lights from a football field?" He slowed the car and read the sign above the entrance aloud. "Autos? Like the Ottoman Empire?" I put a hand over my face. "No, not like the Ottoman Empire. Auto like auto, short for automation." He nodded very seriously. "Or automaton. But honestly, I like the Empire connection better." I laughed. "I swear, boys and empires." "You're such a dork." He leaned over and kissed me quickly, then turned off the car. We stepped outside into the cold, and without the heated seats and warm air, the night felt sharper than before. I tucked my hands under my arms and hurried toward the entrance in a half-run. George got there first and held the door open for me like we were in some old movie. "Ma'am," he said with a little bow. I reached up and tapped him on the forehead with 2 fingers. He blinked. "What was that for?" "You're it," I said, and ran off down the first aisle before he could react. I heard the door swing shut behind him. His footsteps came after me, and I turned around one aisle and then another, laughing under my breath. The store looked almost too clean. The floor gleamed. Every product was lined up perfectly. Digital labels glowed beneath the shelves. The place smelled like coffee, plastic, and something sweet from the bakery section. I slipped past the baked goods, ducked around the drink coolers, and crouched into a candy aisle, trying not to laugh too loudly. I heard his shoes squeak on the polished floor. Then I heard nothing. At first, that made the game better. I held my breath and waited for him to jump out from one end of the aisle. 10 seconds passed, then 20, then maybe another 10. The silence started feeling weird. I stood up slowly and called his name. Nothing. Then arms wrapped around me from behind. "Got you!" I screamed so hard my own voice hurt my ears, and I spun around, swatting at him. "Fuck!" He grinned. "Yeah?" "Shut up," I said, shoving him away. He laughed. "Hey, you started it." I crossed my arms and tried to act annoyed, but he kept grinning, and after a few seconds I cracked. We both started laughing so hard we had to lean on the shelves. As our laughter died down, we heard a strange, squeaking, whirring sound coming from the front of the store. It sounded like someone walking in rubber shoes while pushing a cart with bad wheels. We both turned toward the end of the aisle. Then Otto rolled into view. He was smaller than a person, but still large enough to be unsettling if you were not expecting him, maybe 4.5 feet tall. He moved on a broad base, shaped almost like a pyramid, with dark rubber wheels underneath. His torso was a rectangular screen and kiosk built into one body. His arms were folded together in front of him so neatly that at first they looked like a single, smooth bar. His head was bulky and simple, with a painted smile on it that looked like a sideways bracket. "Hello," it said in a slow, robotic voice. "May I be of service?" Its head tilted a little as it spoke. George stared. "Damn, it's real." I gave him a look. "What, you thought I was lying?" No, I just..." He looked around the store more carefully now. "Wait, is this really all automated? There's no one else working here?" Then he reached over and patted Otto on the head. "Do you need help finding any items?" the robot asked. "No, we're okay," I said. "We'll let you know." "Thanks, Otto." It stayed still for an awkward couple of seconds, then slowly turned around and rolled away. George watched it go. "So, Wally or no?" I smirked. "Well," he tilted his head. Nah, I mean, it's cool, but not Wally cool. We walked farther into the store. As we passed a glass display full of mechanical arms, he tapped on the glass like he expected one to move. Nothing happened. "This place is no fun," he said. "If they're going to do the robot thing, they should really commit." "The coffee machine is robotic too," I told him. That got his attention immediately. We went past the bakery and around a side section where expensive electronics sat behind another glass wall. Then we reached the coffee area, which was enclosed in a clear box with a menu screen in front. Inside was one pale white robotic arm, mounted in the center among coffee machines and dispensers. "Want anything?" George asked as he scrolled through the menu. "At 1 in the morning?" "No. They have decaf." "I'm good. I'll just get mints or something." "All right, then I'll get..." A voice behind us interrupted him. "Is there anything else I can help you find?" I jumped and turned. Otto was right there behind us again. George looked at me. No thanks. I'm just getting coffee." Otto stayed there for several seconds, as if waiting for us to explain ourselves. Then it turned and rolled away again. After a moment, George said quietly, "Was that creepy as hell, or is it just me?" "It was weird," I admitted. "Maybe they just programmed him to be overly helpful." He did not look convinced, but he finished ordering the coffee. The robotic arm inside the glass box sprang to life. It grabbed a cup, moved it under the dispenser, filled it, added hot water with perfect precision, snapped on a lid, and delivered it to the pickup slot. It was impressive in a sterile kind of way. George took the cup, sipped it, and said, "Yep, that is definitely coffee." We headed back toward the front. Near the candy, he asked, "You want your gum?" "Mints," I corrected him. "Right. They're here." I stepped over to the shelf and started looking. That was when I heard loud slurping behind me. I glanced back. George had the cup lifted under his nose and was taking the most exaggerated, obnoxious sip possible. "Could you drink that any louder?" I asked. He swallowed and then said in a dead robotic tone, "Sorry, ma'am, I did not hear you. I lost it." I laughed so hard I had to grab the shelf. I pushed him lightly. "You're such an idiot." I picked out the Altoids I liked, and we walked to the main kiosk in the center of the store to check out. Neither of us wanted to interact with Otto again, so we used the self-checkout screen. George tapped display items, and both the coffee and the mints showed up immediately with their prices. But there was a third line, too. Unlabeled. $0. George looked at me. "Do you have something else?" I raised both hands. "No." "That's weird." He shrugged and paid anyway with Apple Pay. The screen beeped and cleared the total. It asked if he wanted a receipt, but we ignored it and walked toward the door. Otto was parked near a rack of Slim Jims facing us. George gave it a little wave and grabbed the door handle. The door did not open. He pulled harder. Nothing. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I think it's locked." Then a woman's voice crackled over an intercom I had not even noticed before. Both of us jumped and looked up. I suddenly became aware of how many dark security domes were fixed to the ceiling around the store. "Attention customers," the voice said. "Please remember to pay for all items before leaving the store." George and I stared at each other. "We did pay," I said up at the ceiling. No answer. Just silence and the soft, idle hum of the machines. George muttered under his breath and walked back to the kiosk. I followed him quickly. glancing over my shoulder at Otto. He hit the display button again. One item was listed. Unlabeled. $0. "What the hell?" George said. Then louder, "What is this? What are you charging me for?" No reply. He sighed in frustration and paid for it again, even though it cost nothing. Another beep sounded. He grabbed my hand and led me quickly back to the door. The second his hand touched the handle, the intercom came on again. "Please pay for all items. Theft will not be tolerated." The door stayed locked. George turned, angry now. "No! Screw this." He pulled out his phone. "If you don't let us out right now, I'm calling the cops." The voice answered immediately. "If you continue taking items without paying, we will have to retrieve them." Otto moved. It was only a slight jerk forward at first, but the motion made my whole body tighten. "Where are you?" I called up at the ceiling. "Are you in the store? You can see we didn't take anything. I'll put the mints back." I started toward the aisle, but George grabbed my wrist hard. "Don't," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Let go," I said. "You're hurting me." That snapped him out of it. He released my arm at once. "Sorry, I know," I said. "I don't care about the mints. Let's just put everything back and leave." He still looked angry, but he nodded. He set the coffee down by the kiosk, and I returned the mints to the shelf. Then we tried the door again. This time, Otto was standing in front of it. "Final warning," the voice said. Rougher now, almost static-filled. "Return the items, or we will retrieve them." George held up his hands. "Fine. Go ahead and retrieve them." I stared at him. "George, what are you doing?" "What?" "We don't have anything. Let it do whatever it thinks it needs to do." That was not how George usually talked. He was calm by nature, gentle. But he was angry, and I think embarrassed and trying to act tougher than he felt. He raised his hands higher like he was surrendering. Otto rolled toward him. Its folded arms separated into two pieces and extended outward. At first, it moved so slowly that neither of us reacted. That was the trick of it. It moved with the harmless pace of a service robot, just enough to keep us from panicking. Then, with a click, something changed. Each arm split along a seam, and two narrow rods shot out from inside them. They were thin and pointed, like dull metal blades. Before either of us could move, they drove straight into George's stomach. For a second, nothing happened. At least that is how it felt. Like the whole world stopped and waited. Otto had already retracted a little, almost politely, as if giving him time to understand what it had done. George looked down at his shirt. Two dark, wet spots spread through the fabric. He looked back at me with complete confusion. Then his knees gave a little. That broke the spell. I lunged forward and grabbed him as he stumbled. Otto moved in again for the second strike, and I kicked it as hard as I could in the head. The metal rang with a horrible sound, and the robot jerked sideways. "Vandalism will not be tolerated," the intercom announced. George whispered my name. His arm came around my shoulder, weak and heavy. I could feel warm blood soaking through his shirt and onto my hands as I pulled him backward. Then the voice came on again. "Clean up at main entrance." Something mechanical clicked open somewhere. I thought for one horrible second there were more of them, more robots rolling out from hidden compartments. But instead, I saw a small Roomba-like machine slide out and begin cleaning George's blood off the floor behind us. That was somehow worse. "Rach," George said weakly. Just hold on, I told him, though my own voice sounded thin and terrified. He coughed, and blood sprayed from his mouth across his chin and shirt. I nearly threw up. We staggered through the aisles while Otto followed us at the same steady pace, arms still extended. I knew George could not keep moving much longer. I had to stop the bleeding somehow, had to call 911, had to get us somewhere the robot could not reach. Then I saw a sign, Drink Den. It was a cooler section at the back, with a recessed path leading to a heavy, insulated door. I dragged George toward it with everything I had left. My hands slipped on blood. My legs felt weak. I reached the handle and yanked. It opened. I got him inside and pulled the door shut behind us. The sudden cold air hit me hard. Blue refrigerator light filled the room, dim and unnatural. Shelves of bottled drinks lined the walls. The low hum of cooling units filled the silence. For a few seconds, I could only stare at the door, waiting for the handle to move. It did not. Then I remembered George. I dropped beside him. He was on the floor, clutching his stomach, breathing in slow, ragged pulls. I lifted his shirt and finally saw the wounds clearly. They were narrow, deep punctures, like huge fang marks made by something mechanical and precise. Blood kept coming. Too much blood. I yanked off my coat, then my shirt beneath it, tore the shirt into strips, and pressed them over the wounds. George cried out. I know, I said, sobbing now. Please just hold this. Just for a second while I call. I guided his shaking hands over the cloth and reached for my phone. At that exact moment, the little blue light in the cooler clicked off. The room went completely black. I gasped and dropped my phone. I heard it skid away over the floor and disappear somewhere among the shelves. Shit, I whispered. I got down on my hands and knees, trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. I reached out in front of me, feeling blindly through the dark. My fingers hit something soft. At first, I thought it was a hanging jacket or a crate with cloth over it. Then I touched skin. Cold skin. My hands moved and found a wet patch. I lifted my fingers to my nose and caught the smell immediately. Blood. Old blood, thick and metallic. I shoved myself backward so fast my shoulder hit the shelf and bottles crashed to the floor all around me. A vent kicked on with a low rumble somewhere in the darkness. Shapes began to form as my eyes adjusted. Shelves, bottles. And on the floor, not far from me, the outline of a body. Then I heard the whirring. Low. Mechanical. Close. My mind started making shapes in the dark. Faces, arms, curved heads like Otto's. The whole room seemed full of them. Then George called weakly, Rachel? His voice saved me. I moved toward it at once, feeling for him in the dark until I found his face. Hey, I whispered, though I was barely holding myself together. His skin felt cold enough that for one awful second, I thought I had touched the wrong body. Then his hand weakly grabbed my arm and squeezed once before falling away. Baby, I said, I need your phone. Where is it? Pocket, he whispered. Hurts. I know. I felt through his jeans and found it. I unlocked the screen, but it asked for his face. I skipped to the code entry. Babe, what's your PIN? No answer. I shook him lightly. George, your PIN. He forced out one word. Met. I stared at the phone. Met? Nothing. Then softly, we met. And I understood. The date we met. January 10th, 0110. The code worked. I rushed to call 911. A screech of interference burst from the phone, followed by an automated message saying the call could not be completed. I checked the signal. No bars. I stood up fast, thinking maybe the cooler blocked service. I stumbled to the door and reached for the handle. Then I remembered why we had come in here at all. I froze with my hand hovering over it. Every hair on my arm stood up. I pressed my ear against the door, but I could not hear anything outside over the hum of the refrigeration. George moaned behind me. I had no choice. I took a breath, grabbed the handle, and pulled. The door opened immediately. Too immediately, because someone was pushing from the other side. A tall, dark figure appeared in the doorway so suddenly that I screamed and nearly fell backward. In the dim light from outside, all I saw at first were broad shoulders and reflective eyes. Then it spoke in a southern accent. "Oh, hell," it said. "You okay? What's going on in here?" It was a man. At least it looked and sounded like one. I was so shocked that for a second I could not answer. I looked past him into the store. It was much darker now than before. Most of the blinding white lights were off. Only dim red and yellow displays glowed here and there. "Where is it?" I muttered. "Where's what?" "Otto," I said. "The robot. The one in the store." He frowned. "I ain't seen no robot. I just stopped for gas and walked in when the lights went weird." I stood there listening, waiting for the whirring to come back. Nothing moved. The man glanced at my blood-covered chest and then quickly away. "Sorry to ask, but your shirt?" I looked down and remembered I had ripped it apart for George. George groaned again behind me, and I dropped all hesitation. "There's a robot in this store," I said fast. "It stabbed my boyfriend. He needs an ambulance. Do you have service?" The man stepped back and checked his phone. "Yeah, got bars." My whole body tightened with relief. "Please call 911. He nodded. "Sure. What do I tell them?" "Tell them someone was stabbed. And send police, too." He did. I heard him talking to the dispatcher, giving the location, answering questions as best he could while I crouched beside George and tried to keep him conscious. When he hung up, he said, "We should get him out of this cold room." I looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because if he's bleeding that bad, you want to keep him warm. I think. I got a first aid kit in my truck, too." That sounded reasonable. It really did. I checked George again with the flashlight from his phone. His face had gone pale, almost gray. He was shaking. "Okay," I said. "Help me." The man introduced himself as Judson, said I could call him Judd, and together we carried George out of the cooler. As we moved through the store, I gave Judd the short version of what had happened. The checkout glitch, the locked door, the intercom, Otto attacking George. In the dark, I could not read his face well, but he did not interrupt me. When we reached the front, he tried the door and swore. "It really is locked." "Yes," I said. "That's what I've been saying." He thought for a second, then pointed toward the kiosk. "What if I just pay for the unlabeled item? If that's what it wants, maybe the door unlocks." I had not really thought there was logic to any of this, but at that point I would have tried almost anything. "Fine," I said. He walked to the checkout while I knelt beside George again. I checked his breathing. It was faint. His pulse was weak. "Oh, God," I whispered. From the kiosk, Judd called out, "I see it. You ready?" I stood and grabbed the door handle. The intercom crackled. Then came a beep from the kiosk. "Now!" I pulled. This time the door opened. Cold night air rushed in, and for one brief second I almost cried with relief. Then something about what Judd had said earlier came back to me. His truck. I looked out over the lot. George's Camry was there. Nothing else. No truck. No other vehicle at all. My hand locked around the handle. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast footsteps. I spun and slammed the door shut right in Judd's face. He stopped just inches away on the other side of the glass. His expression had changed. Or maybe it had always been wrong and I was only seeing it clearly now. There was no surprise, no anger, just this calm, measuring stare. Then he tilted his head slightly to one side, exactly the way Otto did. He turned away from me and I walked over to George. I screamed at him not to touch him, but he did not. Instead, he bent down in a stiff, unnatural motion and picked up George's phone from the floor. Then he walked backward, perfectly backward. No human being moves like that. He disappeared behind the kiosk. I could have run. I think about that all the time. The door was open. I could have gone. George was almost gone already. I could have saved myself, but I could not leave him. I ran to the Camry, ripped off one of the windshield wipers, and jammed it into the doorway so the front door could not latch fully shut. Then I hurried back to George and slipped his car keys from his pocket while pretending to check on him. Somewhere in the back of the store, glass shattered. I looked up. The display case of robotic hands had broken open. The hands were moving now, crawling over the floor on metal fingers like horrible little insects. From the other side came Otto rolling toward me again. Then Judd stepped into view near the kiosk. He was not pretending anymore. The thing I had thought was his head was gone, replaced with a flat speaker box draped in black grill cloth, with wires hanging from the sides like earrings. The Roomba-like cleaner moved at his feet. Otto's voice came out of the speaker first. "What's wrong? Don't you want to stay with us? We'd love to help you find what you need." Then the woman's voice from the intercom came from the same speaker. "But remember, theft is not allowed at Otto's, and vandalism will not be tolerated." Then Judd's drawl returned, but now there was something dead and mechanical under it. "So what do you say, sweet thing? How about I fix us all up a cup of coffee and we can talk about it?" The thing lifted one arm and, with the other hand, tore it off. Black fluid and little writhing cables spilled from the torn joint. It dropped the arm to the floor, and the severed piece began dragging itself toward me like the others. I was too disgusted to even scream. I backed out through the prop door and shoved the windshield wiper deeper into the gap so the entrance would seal behind them. Then I sprinted to the Camry, unlocked it, threw myself inside, and started the engine. The familiar smell of George's car hit me at once. The air freshener, the warm, dusty heater smell, and underneath that, the faint scent that was just him. For 1 second, it almost broke me. Then I threw the car into reverse and backed as far across the lot as I could. The whole front of the store was ahead of me now. Through the glass, I could see them gathered there. Otto, Judd, the crawling hands, the cleaner, the kiosk glowing in the middle. I closed my eyes and said a quick prayer. Then I slammed my foot onto the gas. The tires shrieked against the new concrete. The car shot forward. I hit the glass doors first, then kept going as the windshield exploded, and the frame crumpled inward. The car bounced over the crawling machines. I clipped Judd and smashed straight into the kiosk at the center of the store. The airbags exploded in my face. Then everything went black. When I woke up, there was a soft beeping somewhere near me. The air was warm. A blanket was tucked over my feet. I opened my eyes to white light and saw my mom asleep in a chair nearby. "Mom," I whispered. Then I drifted off again. The next time I woke up, a doctor was talking quietly with my parents. He noticed my eyes open and came over. My mom rushed to my side so fast she almost knocked the chair over. They explained my injuries: 2 broken ribs, a broken arm, cuts, bruises, and other smaller things. I barely heard any of it. "George," I said. "Is he okay?" The room changed immediately. My mom started crying before she even spoke. "He's not dead," she said quickly, seeing my face. "But..." The doctor stepped in and explained. George had lost an enormous amount of blood. By the time he was found, he was barely breathing. His heart had nearly stopped. They got him stabilized and stopped the bleeding, but he had gone without enough oxygen for too long. He had been unconscious ever since. A coma. I asked to see him right away. They said they could take me once I felt strong enough. I told them I was strong enough now. They wheeled my bed down the hall and into another room. It was dark except for the machine lights. I recognized George immediately, even with all the tubes and monitors around him. His skin had some color again. His face looked peaceful in a way that made it even harder to bear. They positioned me so I could reach him with my good hand. Then they left me for a while. Before they did, one of the nurses said 2 officers would want to take my statement if I was up for it. I said yes. I spent a few quiet minutes beside George first, touching his hand and staring at the rise and fall of his chest. Part of me still expected him to open his eyes and make some stupid joke about all of it. I knew that would not happen, but I still waited for it. The officers came in a little later. 2 men, both middle-aged, polite, in that careful official way. They said they were sorry for what happened to us. Then they asked me to tell them everything from the beginning. So I did. This time I told the whole truth. I told them about the movie, the drive, the bright gas station, Otto following us, the checkout error, the locked door, the intercom, the stabbing, the dead body in the cooler, Judson, all of it. Saying it out loud made it sound insane even to me, but I kept going. George's machine kept beeping in the background the whole time. When I finished, they looked at each other. One of them had a notebook out, but I noticed he had not turned the page once. "Look," I said, "I know it sounds crazy, but that's what happened. You have cameras, right? You have video." The taller officer nodded. "Yes. We reviewed the footage." "And?" He hesitated. His partner answered. "The footage shows you and George entering the store. Nobody else went in that night." I stared at him. "We saw the checkout problem," he continued. "The system was flagging something as unpaid merchandise." "What?" I asked. "What was it?" He gave the strangest answer I've ever heard. "It was air," he said. "More specifically, your breathing. The sensors were incorrectly registering the air displaced by your breathing as an unscanned item." I just looked at him. "That's why the lockdown happened," he said. "That's why the store tried to stop you from leaving." My face went hot. "The store tried to kill us." The officer's expression barely changed. "We did not see that on the footage." I laughed once in disbelief. You didn't see a robot stab my boyfriend? We found your boyfriend in the driver's seat after the crash, the other officer said. There were cables through his abdomen from inside the vehicle and surrounding equipment after impact. The store had severe damage, broken displays, destroyed machinery, but no moving hands, no extra person, no body in the cooler. I could not even process what I was hearing. You're saying this was our fault? We're saying the automated system malfunctioned, he said carefully. You and your boyfriend panicked. Then you drove a car through private property. My boyfriend was stabbed before we ever got in the car. We are not charging you, the officer said. The owners agreed not to pursue civil action, considering the misunderstanding. They wanted us to let you know that if there is ever a support issue again, there is a helpline accessible through the kiosk. I stared at him with my mouth open. Then he added, almost as if doing me a favor, on the criminal side, we're willing to let this go. But you need to understand that destroying property is not an acceptable response. I could barely breathe. They started toward the door, apparently done with me. Wait, I said. They stopped. There was a man, I said. Or something pretending to be a man. His name was Judson. You really didn't find anyone else in there? The officer nearest the door paused for a few seconds. Then he tilted his head just slightly and smiled. Sure didn't, he said. And I swear to God, in that moment, he looked exactly like Otto. Story 2. I was around 11 or 12 when it happened. Old enough to remember it clearly, at least in pieces, but still young enough that the adults around me decided what was serious, what was explainable, and what was better forgotten. Even now, years later, I still do not know what to do with that memory. I have tried to tell myself it was simple. An accident, a sharp edge, a hidden nail. Kids get hurt all the time and do not notice until they see blood. That should be enough. But it never has been. My family used to go to this big mall every now and then. It was one of those places that seemed huge when you were a kid. The kind with bright lights, food smells hanging in the air, long, shiny floors, and enough people moving around to make every trip feel like an event. I do not remember exactly what we had gone there to buy that day. Maybe clothes, maybe groceries, maybe nothing important at all. We often ended up there just because it had everything and kept everyone occupied. At the very back of the second floor, there was an indoor play area. What made it strange, even before anything happened, was how hidden it felt. There were no bright signs leading to it, no loud music spilling out into the hallway, no burst of kids' voices that would tell you something fun was behind the doors, just two blank doors set into the wall, plain enough that you could walk past them without ever knowing what was there. But once you went through them, the feeling changed. I do not know how else to explain it, except to say that it never felt like part of the same mall. It was like stepping into a separate place tucked inside the building, disconnected from the noise and movement outside. The air always seemed different in there. The sound, too. Softer, more muffled, as if the walls swallowed things. Inside, there were a few inflatable castles, a small parkour section with padded obstacles, and a tiny football pitch surrounded by a metal cage. It was not a huge area, but when I was a kid, it felt big enough. I had been there before. My sisters usually stayed near the counter at the entrance, buying sweets or drinks, while I wandered off to play. That day was no different. They stayed near the front. I went in alone. There was only one other kid in the football pitch, around my age as far as I could tell. I do not remember his face very clearly now, which is strange because you would think I would. I remember his size. I remember the shape of him. But his actual features are blurry in my mind, as if my memory never fully held onto them. We did not introduce ourselves. We did not say hello. We did not do what kids usually do and ask each other names or teams or ages. We just started passing the ball. At the time, that did not seem weird. Kids can play without talking. It happens. You kick a ball, someone kicks it back, and suddenly that is the whole agreement. But looking back, the silence stands out. It was not awkward exactly. It was just complete. The only sounds were the ball hitting the floor, the cage, our shoes, the faint air noise from the rest of the room. We passed it back and forth for a while. Then we started kicking harder. I remember enjoying that part. Trying to make each pass faster, lower, sharper. Not trying to score, not really competing, just building force. At some point, one of us sent the ball too high, and it flew up and over the metal cage. That happens all the time in places like that. Nothing strange there. I walked over to get it. The ball had landed just outside the cage. I bent down, picked it up, and tossed it back in. That should have been the end of it. A simple moment. One of those tiny, meaningless things that vanish from memory an hour later. But when I looked back up, the other kid was standing still. He was staring at me. Not staring the way someone does when they are annoyed or waiting or expecting you to hurry up. He looked disturbed, genuinely disturbed. His face had this fixed expression I still remember more clearly than his features themselves. Not fear exactly. More like shock trying to stay quiet. "You're bleeding," he said. I actually thought he was joking. Kids say weird things. They mess with each other. So I asked, "Where?" He did not answer with words. He just pointed at my face. And then I felt it. Not pain. That is the part I still cannot get past. There was no pain at all. Just warmth. A sudden wet warmth running from the top right side of my forehead, down past my eyebrow, into my eye, along my cheek. I reached up automatically and wiped at it. When I pulled my hand away, it was covered in blood. A lot of blood. Even now, that image feels sharper than almost anything else from that day. My hand red. The shock of seeing that much of it. The strange delay between my body being injured and my brain realizing something was wrong. The thing is, I never felt anything hit me. No scratch, no cut, no blow to the head, no sharp corner, no wire, no nail, nothing. There was no impact. There was no moment where I flinched or stumbled or reacted. 1 second I was perfectly fine, bending down to grab the ball. The next second, blood was running into my eye. I did not scream. I did not even panic, at least not right away. I just walked out of the football pitch, trying to understand what was happening. When my sisters saw me, they started crying immediately. That part I remember with weird clarity, too. Their faces changed in an instant. Whatever expression children have when they realize this is not a joke, not pretend, not a minor scrape. One of them screamed for help. The other looked frozen. After that, everything becomes patchy. It is not that I remember nothing. It is that the memory stops connecting properly. I remember being taken behind the counter. I remember an adult crouching near me with napkins or towels pressed to my forehead. I remember hearing my parents' names called out over the loudspeakers in the mall. I remember people gathering, then moving away again. I remember someone asking me a question I did not answer because I could not focus on the words. But emotionally, I felt almost nothing. No pain, no real fear, no crying, just this strange blankness, like I had stepped half out of the situation and was watching it from too far away. That is what makes the memory feel wrong now. Not only the cut itself, but the way my mind seemed to slide over the event instead of fully living through it. Then everything skips. That is the only word for it. One moment I am still in or near the play area. The next, I am in my parents' car outside a hospital. I do not remember leaving the mall. I do not remember getting into the car. I do not remember the drive. I do not know whether there was an ambulance involved or if my parents drove me straight there. I have asked about this since, and even their version never fully helped. They remember the panic, the rush, the hospital, but my own memory between those points is just gone. Cleanly gone, like a piece of tape cut out of a recording. At the hospital, things become clear again. I remember the lights. I remember the clean smell. I remember someone checking the cut and deciding it was not dangerous enough to be dramatic, just deep enough to need closing. And I remember being given a choice between stitches and glue. For some reason, that choice felt very important to me. I picked glue. That was the first time I felt pain. The second they applied it, it burned so badly that I finally came back into myself. That is the best way I can describe it. Until then, I had been numb, distant, disconnected. But the glue burned, and suddenly I was fully in my body again. I can still remember the sting with uncomfortable clarity. It shocked me almost more than the injury itself because it was the first thing that felt real. After that, everything returned to normal in the ordinary way life does after something strange. The wound closed. The bleeding stopped. Someone at the hospital gave me a small plush toy. I remember holding it. I remember taking it with me. I never saw that plushie again after that day. That is a small detail, but it bothers me more than it should. I brought it home. I know I did. Yet afterward it was just gone. Not in my room. Not with the rest of my things. Not packed away somewhere obvious. It vanished from my life the same way part of that afternoon did. The cut healed well enough. I still have the scar. It is on the top right side of my forehead. If I touch it, I can still trace the thin raised line where the skin closed. It is not large, but it is there, permanent proof that something happened whether I understand it or not. At some point, my dad asked me what had happened. By then, I had already started building the version of the story that made sense. I told him I must have hit an exposed nail when I bent down to pick up the ball. He accepted that. Everyone did. It was believable. Indoor play areas are cheap sometimes, badly maintained. A nail sticking out from the side of a cage or the wall near the floor was not impossible. It explained the sudden cut. It explained why I did not notice the exact moment. It gave the adults a reason they could work with, and once adults have a reason that satisfies them, they rarely go looking deeper. The only problem is that I never saw a nail. Not then. Not before. Not after. I never felt metal touch my skin. I never bumped into anything. I never heard a scrape. I never found the spot where it could have happened. If there had been a sharp edge right where I bent down, surely I would have seen it afterward, or someone would have checked. As far as I know, nothing was ever reported or fixed. The play area stayed open. No one came back later with a warning. No sign appeared. No one said another child got hurt. I have been back to that mall many times since. The play area is still there. Same blank doors. Same strange feeling when you step inside. Even now, older and fully aware of how memory can distort places from childhood, I still feel it. That separation. That hush. It is as if sound behaves differently in there. The rest of the mall can be busy and loud, but beyond those doors, everything softens into something too still. And every time I go back, I avoid that football pitch. I do not go near it. Not because I am afraid of seeing blood. Not because I think there is still some hidden nail waiting there all these years later. It is something harder to explain than that. It is because standing too close to that cage makes me feel as if I am approaching a point where something happened that never fully revealed itself. I have thought about the other kid a lot, too. Who was he? Why do I remember his reaction more clearly than his face? Why did we never speak except for those 2 words? Why, after seeing me bleeding, does he vanish from my memory almost completely? I do not remember whether he called for help. I do not remember whether he stayed there. I do not remember him speaking to any adults. It is as if he existed only for the moment he needed to tell me what had already happened. Sometimes I wonder whether he was even there in the normal sense. That sounds ridiculous, I know. Childhood memory is unreliable. Shock erases details. Strange moments become stranger over time because the mind keeps returning to them and polishing the unease. I know all that. I tell myself all that. Still, one thing remains. If I had cut myself on something physical, there should have been a moment, a contact, a cause. There was none. And what disturbs me most is not only the missing cause, but the feeling that came with it. That blankness, that skip in time, that total absence of pain until the glue touched the wound. It was as if whatever opened my skin did it without passing through the normal steps of injury. No impact, no warning, just result. Sometimes when I think about it too long, I remember the play area itself more vividly than the cut. The way the doors seemed to separate one world from another, the silence inside. The way the football pitch felt oddly self-contained, like a box within a box. The lack of noise for a place meant for children. Even as a kid, some part of me knew it was off. Not dangerous exactly, just wrong in a quiet way. I do not know what happened to me there. Maybe I really did catch my forehead on something sharp and my brain simply failed to record the instant. Maybe shock erased the pain and the memory after. Maybe the other details only feel eerie now because I had spent too much time trying to fit them together. But there is another possibility I cannot quite shake. That something in that place touched me without being seen. That whatever cut me was there for a second and gone before my mind could catch up. That the reason I never found the nail is because there was never one to find. I still have the scar. It is small, easy to miss unless I point it out. Most people would hear the story and shrug. Childhood accident. End of mystery. But every time I catch sight of that line in the mirror, I think about the warmth of blood running into my eye, the other boy's expression, And that awful, impossible question that still has no answer. If nothing touched me, then what actually cut me? Story 3. When I was a kid, I used to go fishing with my grandpa all the time. We always went to the same river. It was not a huge river, not one of those famous places people travel to see, but to me it felt important, almost sacred. The water was usually dark and cold, moving slow in some places and fast in others, and the trees around it leaned in close like they were guarding it. Even now, when I think about my childhood, that river comes back to me more clearly than almost anything else. I can still remember the smell of wet earth, the sound of insects in the grass, the way the morning mist would sit low over the water before the sun burned it away. Every single time we went there, my grandpa told me the same story. He would bait his hook, cast his line, settle into the old folding chair he always brought, and then, almost like part of a ritual, he would begin. Once upon a time, he said, a lumberjack was walking through those woods when he dropped his axe into the river by accident. He looked into the water, hoping to spot it through the dark current, but he could not see where it had gone. Then something began to rise from the depths. The lumberjack backed away in fear. Out of the river came a beautiful woman with blue hair and long robes, walking across the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. In her hands she held a golden axe, shining bright even in the gray forest light. She asked the lumberjack if that was the axe he had lost. The lumberjack, being honest, told her no. His axe had been old iron, rusty and plain. The river lady smiled. Then she disappeared beneath the water and rose again holding both the golden axe and the lumberjack's own old axe. 'Cause he had been honest, she told him, he could keep both. That was the whole story. And my grandpa told it exactly the same way every time. As a child, I loved it. It had everything I wanted stories to have. Mystery, kindness, reward, and a strange magical being hidden inside the ordinary world. I imagined the river lady many times. Sometimes she was beautiful and gentle, like something from a fairy tale. Other times she seemed older and stranger, more like the river itself had taken human shape. But always she stayed with me. And because my grandpa told the story, I believed in it in the way children believe in things that come from people they trust. I did not need proof. The river was there, and the story belonged to it. Those fishing trips were some of the best parts of my childhood. My grandpa was not a loud or dramatic man. He was quiet, patient, and steady. He knew how to untangle a line without getting frustrated, how to sit still for long stretches without needing to fill the silence, and how to speak just enough to make what he said matter. When I was with him, the world felt slower and easier to understand. I kept the story of the river lady with me for years, long after I grew out of believing in most things children believe in. I carried it the same way I carried all my memories of him. Then my grandpa got cancer. By then I was older, old enough to understand what that word meant, even if nobody in the family wanted to say it directly at first. He got thinner. He moved more slowly. His face changed in a way that frightened me because it made him look less like himself and more like an imitation made from paper and bones. The man who had seemed solid and permanent to all my life began to disappear in front of us. One day, after one of his hospital visits, he asked me to take him fishing. not to any river. To our river. There was no hesitation in his voice when he asked, and there was no room in mine when I answered. Of course I would take him. It felt less like a choice and more like an obligation written somewhere deep in both of us. So we went. I remember that day better than almost any day of my life. The drive was quiet. My grandpa stared out the window most of the way, watching the trees go by. He looked tired, but not unhappy. The sky was pale, and the weather cool. When we got to the river, it looked the same as it always had. That unsettled me more than if it had changed. The same bend in the water, the same slick stones near the bank, the same old trees leaning over it. Time had moved for us, but not for the river. We set up our lines. He sat down carefully, slower than he used to, and for a little while we fished in silence. I remember thinking that maybe he would tell me the old story again, the one about the lumberjack and the golden axe. Part of me wanted that. I wanted one more perfect repetition of something familiar. But that was not the story he told. After a long, quiet stretch, he looked out over the water and began in that same low voice he'd always used, only this time the words were different. He said that after the lumberjack had gone to the village and told everyone about the river lady and her golden gift, the story spread quickly. People were amazed. Some believed him. Some laughed. But a few listened carefully and thought not of wonder, but of profit. If honesty at the river could bring riches, then why not seek out the lady for themselves? Among those people was a fisherman who had recently lost his wife to tuberculosis. A week after her death, he sat in the village saloon drinking and grieving. He heard the lumberjack's story and decided he would go to the river that same night. He brought a wheelbarrow. Inside it was his wife's body, already beginning to rot. At this point in the story, I remember looking at my grandpa in surprise. He had never told me anything like that before. The old story had felt like a fable. This one felt wrong immediately, ugly in a way that made me uncomfortable. But he kept going, his eyes still on the river. The fisherman reached the bank under the cover of darkness and pushed his wife's corpse into the freezing water. Then he waited. After a while, the river lady emerged, but this time she was different. She did not have blue hair anymore. She was blonde. She wore no robes. She was bare and pale and terrible to look at. She asked the fisherman if it was her he had lost in the river. The fisherman said no. Then she went back beneath the water and rose again, dragging the body of a pale, wet woman with her. She told the fisherman that because he had been honest, he could take back the one he had dropped into the river, and he could take her as well. So the fisherman put his dead wife back into the wheelbarrow and began walking home, while behind him he could hear the river lady's bare feet following. When my grandpa finished the story, neither of us spoke for a while. I remember feeling cold, even though the day was not especially cold. The river looked different after that. It was still the same water and same trees, but something had shifted in my mind. The old story had made the river feel magical. This one made it feel hungry. I wanted to ask him why he had told me that story. I wanted to ask where he had heard it, and why he had never told it before, and whether he meant anything by it. But there was something in his face that stopped me. He did not look amused or playful. He looked thoughtful, serious, like he had said what he needed to say. We packed up a while later and went home. As we walked in through the front door, I smelled lunch before I saw anything. A warm home smell, familiar and comforting. The kind that should have made me feel safe. It was my grandmother's cooking, or at least it smelled exactly like it. For one brief second, I forgot the strange story and the strange mood of the day. Then we entered the kitchen. My grandmother was standing there. Not my grandmother, as she had been for years, gray-haired and bent a little with age, moving more carefully than she used to. No, she looked young. Not like a little girl or even a young adult exactly, but like a version of herself from photographs I had seen from decades ago. Her body was straight and strong. Her skin looked fresh, and her hair, unmistakably, was bright blonde. I remember stopping so suddenly that my shoulder hit the doorframe. She turned and looked at us with complete calm, as if nothing at all was unusual. Then she smiled and said, "We should sit down because lunch was ready. I cannot explain what it is like to see someone you have known all your life become impossible in front of you." My first thought was not ghost or monster or miracle. My first thought was simply that something was wrong with me, that I was confused, tired, imagining things. But I looked at my grandpa and saw no surprise in his face, no fear, no shock, just a strange, quiet acceptance. We sat down. I wish I could tell you that lunch itself was horrifying, that something clearly unnatural happened at the table, that my grandmother revealed some obvious sign that she was not really my grandmother anymore. But that is not how it was. The food tasted normal. She moved normally. She spoke in the same voice I had heard all my life. If not for the hair, the youth in her face, the strength in her posture, I could almost have convinced myself nothing was wrong. That was one of the worst parts. The closeness of normality. I barely spoke through the meal. My grandpa spoke a little, but not much. My grandmother asked ordinary questions in an ordinary tone. It all felt thin, like a stage play built to resemble our home. Every little sound seemed too sharp to me. Silverware against plates, the scrape of a chair leg, the soft movement of her feet on the kitchen floor. I do not remember how lunch ended. I only remember wanting to leave the kitchen and yet being too afraid to stand up first. A few days later, my grandpa died. The cancer had been moving quickly, but even so, his death came like a door slamming shut. One day he was still there, weak but present, and then suddenly he was gone. The house became quieter in a way that felt unnatural. It was not just that one person was missing. It felt like the center of the house had been removed. And then my grandmother disappeared. At first, people assumed grief had made her wander off. She had lost her husband. She was old, though after what I had seen, I no longer knew what that word meant where she was concerned. Family members called around. Neighbors were asked. Searchers looked in the nearby roads and woods. The last person to see her said she was walking toward the river, completely naked. She went into the water and did not come back out. After that, the old stories stopped feeling like stories. I spent years trying to explain it all in ordinary ways. Maybe my grandpa had been hallucinating from medication and somehow planted that image in my head. Maybe grief had twisted my memory. Maybe my grandmother had dyed her hair, changed somehow. Or maybe I had only seen what I expected to see after hearing that terrible second story. The human mind can do strange things, especially around death. I know that. I have read enough and lived enough to know memory is not perfect. But no explanation ever settled properly, because there were details I could not shake. The smell of lunch when we entered the house, as if someone had been preparing it all morning. The way my grandfather did not react with surprise. The exact shade of my grandmother's blonde hair, bright and wet-looking somehow, not like dye at all. And the way she looked at us, calm, patient, almost amused. After both of them were gone, I stayed away from the river for a long time. I told myself I was done with old family stories and country superstitions. I moved on with my life, or at least I tried to. I worked, paid bills, made plans, lost people, gained people, did all the ordinary things that slowly build a life around old wounds. But some part of me always remained near that river, stuck on its bank beside a fishing chair, listening to my grandpa tell one story and then another. Time did not heal that. It only made it stranger. Because the older I got, the more I began to understand the second story in a different way. When I was young, I thought it was about greed. The fisherman wanted a reward and did something terrible to get it. But later, I started to hear something else inside it. Grief, desperation, refusal to let go. A man so broken by loss that he was willing to drag death itself to the river and bargain with something inhuman, if there was even the slightest chance of getting his wife back. And then my grandpa took me to that same river when he knew he was dying. He told me that story not long before he came home to a wife who no longer looked old. Maybe he was warning me, or maybe he was teaching me. That thought took root in me slowly, and once it did, it never left. I began remembering little things from my childhood that had seemed harmless then, but felt different later. The way my grandpa always spoke of the river lady with respect, never mockery. The way he never let me throw stones into the deepest part of the river. The way he would sometimes fall quiet and stare at the water as if waiting for something to answer a question he had not asked out loud. I started wondering if the first story had never really been the true one. Maybe it was just the version you tell children, because children need wonder before they can handle dread. Maybe the river does reward honesty, but maybe it also listens for sorrow. Maybe it offers not what is right, but what is wanted. And maybe wanting is the most dangerous thing a person can bring to its bank. There is one more thing I have never told anyone directly. In the weeks after my grandmother disappeared, I thought I heard footsteps outside my house at night. Not shoe steps, bare footsteps. Soft, damp, unhurried. I would lie awake and listen, frozen, while something moved across the porch or through the yard. The steps never rushed. They never scratched or knocked. They just walked, slowly, as if circling. Some nights they passed the bedroom window and faded away toward the back of the house. Other nights they seemed to stop right outside for so long that I held my breath until my chest hurt. Whenever I finally worked up the courage to look, nothing was there. I told myself it was animals, branches, wind, anything at all but what I feared. Still, I stopped looking. Years passed. My life thinned out in ways I did not expect. People I loved left, some by distance, some by death. I found myself returning in thought to my grandpa more and more often. especially in those tired hours of night when memory stops feeling like memory and starts feeling like a place you could walk back into if only you knew the road. I thought about his voice, his patience, his stories. I thought about that final fishing trip, about how little I truly understood while it was happening. And with those thoughts came a dangerous hope. If the river gave one thing back, maybe something else could too. I know how this sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But grief changes the shape of reason. It does not always make you irrational all at once. Sometimes it simply wears little holes in your judgment until impossible ideas start dripping through. First as jokes, then as half-beliefs, then as plans. I began walking in the woods more often, especially in the evenings. There are places not far from the river where the trees grow so close together that the world becomes all shadow and bark and root. In those places, the air feels older, quieter, like the land is listening. I thought of the second story again and again. The fisherman took his dead wife to the river. He sought the lady and brought something home. But rivers are not the only old things in the world. Forests keep stories too. My grandpa had always loved the woods almost as much as the river. He knew every path, every bend, every stand of old trees. He used to say the forest was full of roads you could not see unless you were invited. At the time, I thought that was just another one of his sayings. Now, I am not so sure. Tonight, I am taking my grandpa for a walk in the forest. I have him wrapped carefully, respectfully, the way you would carry something precious and fragile. I tell myself this matters, that intention matters, that love matters. I tell myself I am not like the fisherman in the story, not driven by greed or selfishness. I only want one more conversation, one more story, one more chance to hear his voice, and sit beside him as if the world had not gone wrong. The path I am taking is one he used to walk with me when I was very small. I remember him pointing out mushrooms on fallen logs, deer tracks in the mud, nests high in the branches. I remember how safe I felt back then, my hand in his. The woods enormous around us, but never frightening because he was there. Now I walk alone except for him. The night is cool. The trees stand close. Every now and then the wind moves through the leaves in a long whisper. I keep expecting to hear something else, too. Bare footsteps behind me. Water where there should be no water. A woman breathing softly in the dark. I do not know exactly what will happen when I reach the place I have in mind. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm only a grieving fool carrying bones and memory into the woods because I cannot accept the shape of the world as it is. Maybe dawn will come, and I will still be alone, and that will be the end of it. But deep inside, beneath all the fear and shame and common sense, there is another feeling. Expectation. Because stories do not survive this long unless they feed on something true. If he comes back, I hope he is still himself. I hope he is warm and solid and smiling in that tired, gentle way. I hope he will look at me and know me. I hope he will tell me I did not need to do this, that I should have let him rest, but then sit down with me anyway and begin another story in that quiet voice of his. And if something else comes back instead, something wearing his shape, the way the river lady wore my grandmother's, then I suppose I will finally learn what kind of debt these old places collect. The forest is very quiet tonight. Too quiet. I am close now. I can feel it in the air, the way the dark seems to gather itself between the trees. My hands are shaking, but I keep walking. I think of all those childhood mornings at the river. I think of the first story and the second one. I think of my grandmother's blonde hair. I think of the last person who saw her, stepping naked into the water. I think of bare feet following a wheelbarrow in the dark. Ahead of me, somewhere beyond the trees, I hear movement. Not the quick rustle of an animal. Footsteps, slow, measured, familiar. I want to believe they belong to him. I'm about to find out. If we return, I hope he will be able to tell me stories again. Story 4. The confidential inquiry is due to report back next week, and before it does, I want my version of events on the record. I know how these things work. They will look for the easiest explanation, the least embarrassing conclusion, the neatest version they can hand to the papers and to the university and to the families. They will blame me if they can. The survivor always makes a convenient target. If they insist on pinning this on someone, it ought to be Tamanay. It was his idea from the start. His island, his ambition, his damned romance with the whole thing. There are something like 300 abandoned islands around the British Isles. We could have chosen any one of them. There are enough places with ruined crofts, forgotten chapels, old burial grounds, local stories, vanished communities. Any one of them would have given Tamanay material for his precious book, his lectures, the inevitable television adaptation he was already imagining. But he chose St. Ambrose. St. Ambrose had a story attached to it, which was what drew him. In the spring of 1921, the last 13 families living there flagged down a passing fishing trawler in the night, climbed aboard with only what they could carry, and left the island forever. They never returned. None of them ever gave a satisfying reason. No famine, no epidemic, no obvious disaster, no public confession of terror or hardship. They simply abandoned the place as if some signal had passed silently through the whole settlement, and every one of them understood at once that they had to go. Tamanay loved that. He saw mystery and commercial value. He saw a bestseller. He saw prestige. I wish to God he had seen anything else. When I was invited onto the expedition, I had been 6 months at Vespasian, a tiny college attached to one of those half-prestigious universities that survive mostly on self-regard. I was not chosen because anyone valued me. I was invited by default. The only other folklorist on staff was old Kersal, who was so close to retirement he moved like a man already withdrawing from the world. He had no interest in spending 2 weeks on a wind-beaten island in the North Atlantic, chasing oral histories among collapsed stone walls. So I went. There were 7 of us in the expedition party, all academics of one kind or another, archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, naturalists. I was the folklorist, which in practice meant I was tolerated rather than respected. I could feel their condescension from the moment we boarded the transport ship. They saw me as the one most likely to get misty-eyed over local legends, the one most likely to embarrass them by taking stories seriously. Tamanay, in particular, treated folklore as useful decoration, valuable only when it could be grafted onto hard evidence to make an argument more marketable. St. Ambrose lies a day's journey off the western shoulder of Scotland. far enough out that by the time you approach it, you already feel removed from the ordinary world. The first thing you see are the cliffs. They rise out of the water, black and sheer, as high as tower blocks, with almost no break in them. It looks less like an island than a wall built to keep something in. There is only one real opening, a narrow bay on the eastern side. That is where we dropped anchor. The crew of the transport vessel refused to come ashore. At the time, I thought that was typical sailor superstition. Men who spend their lives on the sea are full of old beliefs they would never admit to in daylight. They claimed it was simpler to remain aboard and guard the ship. Looking back, I wonder what they knew or sensed and lacked the language to explain. The 7 of us went ashore in 2 motor dinghies, loaded down with equipment, barely competent to steer them ourselves. As we drew closer to the beach, I began to see the seabird nests cut into the cliff face, thousands upon thousands of them. Every crack and hollow in the rock seemed occupied. White gannets and gray petrels darted overhead or plunged into the sea below like thrown knives. But the most numerous of all were the cormorants, ragged black things with long necks and greasy-looking feathers. 10,000 breeding pairs, one of the naturalists said with something close to delight as a flock of them wheeled overhead and then followed our dinghies toward shore. In the island's inhabited days, the men of St. Ambrose had climbed those cliffs without ropes to steal the birds' eggs. That was one of the old stories I had read before we came. Generation after generation, men lowering themselves down black rock to plunder nests while the birds beat at them with wings and beaks. The islanders said the birds came to hate man for it. There was one account of a boy on his first egging expedition who disturbed a nest of cormorants. The birds, so the story went, pecked out his eyes. Blind, he lost his hold and fell to his death. The others laughed when I mentioned that story during the voyage. Typical folk exaggeration, they said. A warning tale told to frighten children. I let it pass. There was no point arguing then. We climbed the narrow path from the bay up to the island's only settlement. It was little more than a cluster of 13 low dry stone cottages and a chapel with a tin roof, all of it crusted with moss and half swallowed by the ground. The place looked as if the earth had been slowly reclaiming it for a century. Another 100 years, and there would be almost nothing visible left, just lumps in the grass and a few stubborn walls. We made camp in the shelter of the chapel. By then all of us were exhausted from the voyage and the unloading. The wind never stopped for a moment on that island. It came at us in long, cold blows that made speech seem wasteful. By dark, we were all in our tents, trying to sleep while the whole place shuddered under the force of the gale. I shared my tent with McKay, a dour anthropologist who had, as I later learned, been encouraged onto the expedition because he had recently been caught at work under the influence, and this was considered a useful way to dry him out while keeping him out of sight. He was the kind of man who had ceased to expect kindness and responded to everything with a kind of resentful silence. Twice in the night, I half woke to see him crawling out of the tent and pacing around the chapel in the dark. He could not sleep without drink. He moved like a man trying to walk off something under his skin. So when I woke in the morning and found him gone, I was not particularly surprised. By 10 o'clock, we had eaten breakfast, and still there was no sign of him. Tamanay, who was incapable of admitting that other people had inner lives or private crises, immediately made it sound as if someone had carelessly misplaced a piece of equipment. "Where is he?" he asked me as if I had a duty to know. "He was gone when I woke." "Perhaps he has gone ahead to work," I said. Tamanay clicked his tongue with irritation. "His work is here in the village. It really will not do." Then, puffing himself up into authority, he declared that we would go find him. St. Ambrose is only 3 miles across at its widest point, so a search did not seem difficult. We wrapped ourselves against the wind and split up. Tamanay climbed toward the island's highest survey point, while the rest of us spread out in different directions. I headed west. Not far from the village path, I noticed a boot print in the dirt. Fresh. It was enough to keep me moving in that direction. The sky out over the sea had started to darken with storm clouds, and there was that strange warmth in the air that often comes before bad weather on the coast. I followed the prints toward the cliffs and began to feel uneasy long before I understood why. The path narrowed. The ground grew rougher. Then ahead I saw where the grass had been disturbed near the cliff edge. The earth churned and loose. I went closer, though I almost turned back. When I looked down over the edge, I saw McKay. He lay on a rocky ledge, perhaps 20 feet below, twisted into angles no living body should ever make. His arms and legs had folded under him in ways that made the eye recoil. His face had been ripped to pieces. At first I thought the fall had done it, but then I saw his stomach. It had been torn open. The rib bones jutted upward, and what remained inside him was being pulled apart by seabirds hopping over his body with such ugly enthusiasm that I vomited over my own boots before I even realized I had bent forward. For a moment, I nearly fainted. I remember the world thinning at the edges and the terrible sense that if I pitched forward, I would join him on the rocks below. The only thing that pulled me back from the cliff was hearing the others shouting as they approached. We returned to the chapel just as the storm broke over the island. It came down with real hatred. Rain hammering the tin roof hard enough to drown thought, water forcing itself through every crack and weakness in the old structure. We sat there soaked and silent in the failing afternoon light while Tamanay paced. "We need to leave tonight," I said at last, partly because I believed it, partly because I could not bear the silence any longer. "Fire a flare. Call the boat in. We have to get off this island." Tamanay stopped pacing and looked at me with open disdain. Inconceivable. Sad business, of course, but we all knew how McKay was. We will call the evening off, certainly, but tomorrow we continue. "His body is still out there," I said. I could not quite force myself to say what was feeding on it. Tamanay bit his lip in annoyance, not grief. "Fine. Take one of the dinghies out to the ship in the bay. Have them radio the mainland and bring a winch ashore. It is the only way to recover his..." He let the sentence die. Then he turned to Hermanson, one of the naturalists, an ornithologist with a great rough mane of red hair. "You go with him." Hermanson took the tiller when we pushed off from the beach. The storm had eased for the moment, leaving a thick, rolling mist in its wake. Visibility was poor. The dark shape of the transport ship loomed ahead, half hidden. "The seabirds do not attack people, do they?" I asked her. She snorted, lit a cigarette, and shook her head. Some will dive at you in nesting season if you get too near the eggs. But attack? No. Mackay fell. Birds found him after. That is all. She exhaled smoke into the fog and steered us on. When we came through a bank of mist, the ship was there in front of us, too still. Above it hung a black mass of circling cormorants. A cold unease passed between us, though neither of us said it aloud. We climbed the steel ladder onto the deck. It was a small vessel, cargo and passenger space below a white-painted steel superstructure containing the crew quarters and controls. Near the door to that structure, I saw the captain first. He was dead. His throat had been cut wide open, and he lay with his eyes fixed upward into the rain light, as if he had died trying to understand what was happening. I spun and saw the other two crewmen nearby. One had his head smashed in. The other was face down, his back torn open. Hermanson shoved past me into the control room and tried the radio. Nothing but static. I looked up and saw that the antenna and aerials had been ripped and twisted. Above us, the cormorants turned in a black spiral. "We need to leave," I said. For once, she did not argue. We scrambled back into the dinghy, and she yanked the outboard cord so hard I thought she would tear it free. The engine sputtered to life, and we pulled away as fast as we could. The cormorants followed us toward shore. We were perhaps 100 meters from the beach when I saw something in the water. At first, it was only a shape, dark and ragged beneath the surface, moving with astonishing speed. Then I caught the contrast of pale flesh and black feathers. "Hermanson!" I shouted. But that was all I managed before it struck us. The impact flipped the dinghy clean over. The cold of the sea was instant agony. The overturned boat came down on top of us. Some instinct I did not know I possessed told me not to thrash, not to fight blindly. And that is likely what saved me. I spread my arms and legs and let myself rise. When I broke the surface, I was beside the upturned hull. Hermanson surfaced too. She dragged herself clear of the boat and looked at me once with utter terror in her face. Then something pulled her down. I did not dive after her. I did not shout. I did not even think. I turned and swam for shore with all the desperate selfishness of a trapped animal. I am ashamed of that. But it is the truth. The water burned with cold and stripped all strength from my limbs. Yet I kept going because something worse than drowning was behind me. I crawled onto the beach half numb and staggered upright. Even then, I knew I was not safe. Not there, not in the open. I stumbled up the path toward the village under a darkening sky while another storm gathered. By the time I reached the chapel, I could hardly breathe. The others were inside cooking soup over a gas stove. They all looked up when I came in. I slammed the door behind me. "Well?" Tamanay said, eyebrows raised at my condition. Then, seeing no one behind me, "Where is Hermanson?" I told them everything. The dead crew, the ruined radio, the cormorants, the thing in the sea. The words came out in a rush. Tamanay's answer was laughter. Thin, contemptuous laughter. "Oh, really? That is too much. What next? It breathed fire?" "I saw it," I said. "What I think," he replied, "is that you panicked. You likely overturned the boat yourself. I warned against bringing you. You have not the constitution for difficult work." There was a skittering sound above us on the chapel roof. Everyone went silent. It moved across the tin with an unmistakable rhythm. If I had heard it anywhere else, I would have sworn it was footsteps. Even then, Tamanay tried to preserve his superiority. He shook his head as if to dismiss the fear spreading through the room. "Spooked by birds and weather," he said, and strode to the door. He flung it open and stepped out into the rain, turning back to us with that same superior sneer still on his face. That was the last I saw of him alive. Something took him from above, not talons, hands. It seized him by the back of the neck and lifted him out of sight so fast the moment hardly made sense. If he screamed, the storm swallowed it. I lunged forward and slammed the chapel door shut. "Block it!" I shouted. "Block it!" The others moved then, shock forcing them into action. We dragged equipment barrels against the door and built a rough barricade. Rain leaked through the holes in the chapel roof and spattered around us, reminding us how weak our shelter really was. "What is that thing?" Escher asked me. She was a historian, usually composed, but now pale enough to look translucent. I shook my head. I did not know. I only knew what it had done. There were 4 of us left then. Me, Escher, Agnew the meteorologist, and Jones, a brisk little archaeologist with bright, anxious eyes. They looked at me now not with condescension, but with the same fear I felt. Somehow that steadied me. "I do not know what is out there," I said. "I do not want to know, but it means to kill every one of us. That much I am certain of." As if to confirm it, something landed on the roof again with a metallic booming sound. They wanted a plan. I forced myself to think. "It will expect us to make for the beach," I said. "Flat and open? Perfect for it." "I see no other way off," Escher answered. "We go west," I said. "The cliffs are lower there. We jump." Agnew shook his head at once. "The rocks below will smash us. And if we do make the water, we will not last long in this sea without something to float on." "Here," Jones said suddenly. He gestured toward the large equipment drums we had dragged inside. He began tipping them over, emptying the contents across the chapel floor. "Not much of a raft," he said, "but it might do." It was a good idea, maybe the only one. We lashed 5 of the barrels together with ratchet straps and stretched a tarpaulin over them. It was unstable and ugly, but it floated in theory. And theory was all we had left. While we worked, the scraping and shifting on the roof continued above us. At last, I noticed Tamanay's flare pistol among the scattered equipment. I picked it up, broke it open, and found a red flare already loaded. I had the others move quietly to the side door with the makeshift raft ready to carry. Then I slipped off my shoes and padded across the chapel to the front corner, where the biggest hole in the roof let rain pour through in sheets. I stood beneath it with the flare pistol ready. My heart was thudding so hard, I thought whatever was above must hear it. To draw it closer, I kicked over an old iron candle stand. It crashed to the floor like a bell. A moment later, something moved over the roof toward me. I locked my eyes on the gap above, raised the pistol, and waited. Something pale appeared in the opening, a glimpse of skin, of shape. I fired. The flare shot upward and struck. In that blazing red instant, I saw a hooked, cutting beak, and above it, human eyes. Truly human eyes. Then the flare burst and fire washed over whatever it had hit. "Now!" I shouted. The others burst through the side door into the rain with the raft between them. I ran after them and glanced back once. Against the red light of the burning flare, I saw its shape writhing atop the chapel roof. It was humanoid. That is the worst of it. If it had been holy beast, I might bear the memory better, but it was a perversion of a person with a pale body and a vast burden of black wings rising from its back like some blasphemous angel dragged through mud and carrion. We ran. Through the village first, past the ruined cottages, then out into open ground toward the western cliffs. Jones and I carried the raft between us, which slowed us terribly. But none of us dared abandon it yet. Agnew and Escher were ahead. Behind us I heard the heavy beating of wings through the rain. Its shadow passed over us. Jones cried out. But it did not strike us then. It rushed ahead instead. Escher was furthest in front. She never saw it coming. The night and the rain hid it until it was on her. I saw the beak tear her throat open. She dropped instantly, all motion gone from her as if her strings had been cut. Agnew veered, trying desperately to avoid the same fate. For a few seconds, I thought he might make it. Then it hit him head on. He fought, I think. God bless him, I think he fought. I heard him shouting, then roaring, then screaming, and then the rain swallowed him too. Jones and I veered right, still hauling the raft, running blind with terror toward the sea's distant roar. My lungs were on fire. My legs felt gone. Yet the cliffs were close now. I could hear the water pounding below. I risked one glance behind. It was descending again. "Down!" I shouted. I threw myself flat. Jones tried, but his foot tangled in the raft. He stumbled, his head and shoulders still high. The thing seized him by the hair with its hands and lifted him upward. His glasses fell into the grass. I tore one barrel loose from the raft and left the rest where it was. I was beyond fear then, reduced to one thought only. Reach the edge. Jump. Do not stop. I ran through the rain with that single barrel under one arm, clutching at the ratchet strap fixed around it. Behind me, I could still hear Jones for a while. I did not turn back. I could not. Then the cliff was there. I hurled myself out into the dark. For one suspended instant, there was only wind, and then I hit the sea hard enough to feel the impact through the barrel and straight down my spine. The shock drove all the air from me. I went under. The current seized me at once, dragging me downward and away. By some miracle, my hands found the ratchet strap and held. I fought my way on top of the barrel and wrapped myself around it, legs and arms locked tight. The current pulled me out in a broad sweep away from the island. I looked back once. On the tip of the headland stood the thing. In silhouette, it was horribly human, except for the immense, ragged wings hanging from its pale back and the brute swell of flight muscles in its chest. Around it, the cormorant circled as if crowning it. I flattened myself against the barrel and prayed it would not see me. Then the mist took me, and after that I remember nothing until daylight. I drifted for at least 2 days, perhaps more. The tides toyed with me. More than once I saw land in the distance and tried to will myself toward it, only for the current to pull me back into open sea. Hunger and cold and exposure reduced me to almost nothing. I lost sense of time. At some point, I must have fainted again and again in brief spells. Finally, on the third dawn after I left St. Ambrose, I washed ashore on one of the outer Orkney Isles. I spent a week in hospital in Kirkwall, half frozen, starved, and too exhausted to stand. When the weather improved, a police and Coast Guard delegation sailed to St. Ambrose. They found the transport ship abandoned. They found our camp remains in the old chapel. But they found no bodies, no Hermanson, no Tamanay, no Escher, no Agnew, no Jones, no McKay, no blood, no sign of the violence I described. To them it looked as if the entire expedition had simply vanished, leaving me as the one impossible survivor. So they questioned me. And because I was too feverish and broken to invent anything tidier, I told them the truth. I told them exactly what I have written here. Of course they did not believe me. Why would they? If I had heard such a tale from another man, perhaps I would not have believed it either. There have been days since when I have tried to doubt myself. Days when I have dressed it all up as delirium, trauma, exposure, hallucination, born of fear and weather and grief. I have tried to tell myself McKay fell. The ship suffered some terrible violence I misunderstood. The rest of them were lost to panic and storm. I have tried to make the world ordinary again. But then night comes, and in the dark I see it, standing on that headland exactly as it was. Not bird, not man. That pale, obscene thing with black wings hanging from its back and cormorants wheeling around it like attendants. And I know. By God, I know. Story 5. The engines of the C-13. O shook the whole aircraft so hard that the vibration came straight up through the metal floor and into my boots. Even half asleep, I could feel it in my bones. A hand touched my shoulder. Boss. Wake up, boss. We're about to enter the airspace. I snapped awake instantly. My body tensed before my eyes had even adjusted. My hand shot toward the grip of the short 6-barrel gun at my hip, running on instinct before thought could catch up. For a second, everything was red shadows and noise. Then, the dim emergency lights inside the aircraft came into focus. One of the younger soldiers was leaning over me, giving me an awkward, apologetic smile. "You okay?" he asked. "You look tired." I nodded once and motioned for him to step back. My heartbeat was pounding much harder than it should have been. That bothered me more than anything else. I did not fall asleep on missions. Not in transit. Not before entering a possible combat zone. Not ever. I had trained myself out of that years ago, but this had not felt like normal tiredness. It had hit me fast and heavy, like something dark had been poured over my mind. And when the soldier touched my shoulder, I had felt something else too. A cold sensation, sharp and unnatural, like icy needles slipping through my armor and into my skin. I told myself it was exhaustion. Too many missions for the Bureau, too little sleep, too much pressure stacked on top of too many years in the field. That was the reasonable explanation, so I held on to it. Out of habit, I slid one hand into the innermost pocket of my chest rig and touched the small iron box hidden there. It was cold, dense, and marked with old church seals and binding prayers. Just feeling it where it belonged steadied me a little. I drew a slow breath and stood up. Then I looked over my team. Under the red cabin lights, they were all checking weapons and gear in silence. There were clicks from magazines locking into place, soft movements of straps being adjusted, and the dry metallic sound of safety catches. They were the best people the Bureau had. Some brilliant, some reckless, some far too comfortable around monsters and cursed objects, but all of them reliable when things turned ugly. We had survived every mission together so far. That kind of record did not happen by luck. "Kyle," I said, my voice cutting through the cabin. "Check the equipment again. Everything." Kyle looked up from across the cargo bay. He was a warlock, my oldest friend. and one of the only people in the world who could smirk at me on a mission without getting under my skin. He rolled a small glass vial between his fingers. Inside was a shimmering silver liquid. "Relax," he said. "Latest neuroparalytic compound from the Vatican labs, mixed with distilled holy water. One good dose and a pack of werewolves goes down twitching." Then he glanced toward another soldier and held out a hand. "John, toss me some silver rounds." John, the youngest one on the squad, was carefully wiping each bullet clean one by one with absurd seriousness. He looked up and smiled. "Give me a second, Brother Cale. Almost done." Cale shook his head. "This kid is weird." I glanced at John. For a second, I had the oddest feeling that the seat beside him had just been occupied. Like someone had been there a moment ago and I had somehow forgotten. The thought hit and vanished so quickly, I barely had time to notice it, before a sharp little pulse of pain flickered behind my eyes. Then the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, prepare to land. We have arrived at the Black Forest sector." That snapped everything back into place. I clapped once, loud enough to get every eye on me. "Listen up." The joking stopped immediately. Every face changed. That was one thing I never had to teach them twice. On missions, discipline kept people alive. Sentiment got them killed. I gave the briefing again, even though they already knew it. The Werewolf Clan and the Bureau's monitoring division in Black Forest have gone dark. No communication, no camera feed, no response from the local supervision team. This sector has been stable and under control for years. Our job is to enter, assess, investigate, and eliminate any threat if one exists. Stay sharp, stay in formation. Nobody acts on their own unless I give the order. The rear cargo ramp began lowering with a long mechanical groan. Wind tore into the aircraft at once, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and something metallic, like old rust. When I looked out, I saw the forest swallowed by fog. Not normal fog. It was too thick, too still in some places and too alive in others. It drifted in strange patterns, and buried inside it were faint gray-blue flashes. Tiny flickers like television static in the dark. The second my boots hit the ground, my earpiece screamed with a blast of feedback so sharp I nearly tore it out. Then came crackling, broken noise. Is this the Bureau Armed Squad? I raised a fist instantly, signaling the team to halt. Around me, rifles came up, and the formation spread with practiced speed, all barrels aimed into the shifting fog. "This is Captain Max," I said into the comm. "Identify yourself." A voice answered. "I'm Carter, Chief Supervisor of the Black Forest sector." It sounded wrong. There was a strange echo under it, like another damaged recording was layered beneath his words. "What a surprise," he continued. "This isn't the scheduled inspection day, is it? No matter. The clan patriarch has fresh deer tonight. Come join us for dinner. Everything's still very peaceful here." My blood went cold. The last report from Black Forest had been an emergency signal. Then nothing. Cameras dead. Monitoring squad gone silent. And now Carter was talking like this was a social visit. Cale stepped closer and gave me a questioning look. "Problem?" I did not answer him directly. I kept staring into the fog, every instinct in me already screaming that something ahead was deeply wrong. If Carter had never sent for help, then who had? Or what had? But fear spreads through a team faster than bullets. if you let them see too much too early. So I gave the hand signal. Weapons down to ready. Move in. Looks like we're having dinner, I said over our internal channel, keeping my voice flat and controlled. We advanced in a V formation. The fog smeared against my tactical lenses in slick, wet streaks. It did not smell like mist. It smelled like ozone, scorched wires, and dried blood. My compass spun uselessly. The tracking screen was pure static. The forest itself felt dead. No insects, no birds, no movement except our own footsteps, crushing wet leaves. And all the while, that strange pressure stayed in my head. A low buzzing sensation like something had wrapped itself around my thoughts. 20 meters, came the sniper's whisper over comms. Monitoring station ahead. Then, after a pause, "Boss, it's wrecked." I raised my rifle and looked through the sight. He was right. The Bureau Station, a reinforced two-story structure, built to monitor the local werewolf territory, looked as if something had torn through it by hand. The heavy front door had been ripped off and twisted like cheap scrap. The walls were gouged with claw marks. Shell casings were scattered across the ground. A fight had happened here. A bad one. Then, from inside the dark doorway, a yellow light switched on. Footsteps followed. Calm. Even. A man stepped out. Well, he said cheerfully. "You got here early." The team behind me reacted at once. Safety clicks. Sharp breaths. Kyle hissed between his teeth. I raised my fist high without taking my eyes off the figure. "Do not fire." The man wore a bureau supervisor's uniform. He had Carter's face, at least half of it. The left side of him looked normal, middle-aged, tired, smiling politely. The right side of his head and shoulder were gone. Not bloodied, not torn open in any normal sense, just absent. In the missing space, there was only a writhing mass of gray-blue static, strands and tendrils of flickering light twisting together to imitate the shape that should have been there. It hissed softly, like electricity through wet wires. "Captain," Carter said, lifting a hand that was itself half static, "would you and your team like to come inside? It's cold out." I forced myself to step forward as though nothing about this was impossible. "Hello, Carter," I said evenly. "Looks like your station took some damage." He laughed. "Oh, the door? Some of the boys got drunk and broke the lock yesterday. I took it down to repair it." He believed it. That was the worst part. His expression, his tone, his whole posture made it clear that whatever was speaking through him saw nothing wrong with his body. In his mind, there was no ruin, no missing flesh, no battle. He was normal. The world was normal. That kind of distortion was beyond possession, beyond illusion, beyond anything I had dealt with before. "Come on," he said. "The patriarch is waiting." I looked back at the squad. Even through their visors, I could see it in their eyes. Terror, confusion, the beginning of panic. I gave the signal. Stay calm. No sudden action. Follow. So we followed Carter deeper into werewolf territory. As the main camp came into view through the fog, the feeling in my stomach turned from dread into disgust. There were dozens of them, supervisors, werewolves, local personnel, all moving around camp as if nothing had happened. Every single one of them was visibly dead. Some had giant holes through their chests, the missing cavities filled with throbbing masses of static, where organs should have been. Some were cut nearly in half, their bodies held together by those same gray-blue tendrils. Others had portions of skull missing, or limbs replaced by writhing distortions of light. Scattered on the ground were broken bureau weapons and spent rounds. The signs of massacre were everywhere, and yet they laughed, walked, talked, gestured, as if this were just another evening in camp. The werewolf patriarch approached us with his usual oversized confidence, except half of his body flickered with that same unstable static. "Welcome. Friends from the Bureau," he said, extending a hand. I shook it carefully with my gloved hand. It felt solid, warm enough. Wrong, but solid. He invited us to dinner at the clan mansion. I accepted because there was no version of this where refusing openly would help us. We needed more information, more distance into the heart of the situation, maybe an opening. So when night settled in fully, we went. The dining hall inside the mansion was lit with warm firelight that should have felt comforting. Instead, it made everything worse. It threw shadows across faces that were not fully faces, and over bodies that should have been lying in pieces. The laughter was too loud, too forced. Mixed with it was the crackling, static sound from the creatures' shifting bodies. We were seated at a long oak table. Then they brought the food. A huge platter of meat landed in the center of the table, and the smell almost made me gag. It was not roasted meat. It smelled rotten, wet, and sweet in the worst possible way, like a corpse left too long in summer heat. The pieces of flesh on the platter twitched with those same static filaments, which burrowed in and out of the meat like worms. "Eat," the patriarch said, smiling with blood-bright teeth. "A local delicacy." I kept my face blank. Under the table, Cale's hand tightened around the detonator, hidden in his palm. Sweat was running down the side of his face. Across from me, John was trying very hard not to stare as the things around us tore into the meat and chewed. I tapped my finger against my gun stock in quiet rhythm. "Pretend to eat. Kyle, get ready. 3, 2, 1. I lifted my goblet and forced a thin smile. "The meat is excellent," I said. A toast to the patriarch. That was the signal. The wine had been treated with the Vatican compound before we entered. To normal humans, it would have done almost nothing. To werewolves and related supernatural physiology, it shut the nervous system down hard. It was one of the nastiest, non-lethal tools the church ever gave us. "To the patriarch," I repeated. They drank. The effect was immediate. A dry cracking sound echoed through the room. The giant patriarch stiffened where he sat, muscles locking solid. Around him, the other creatures froze one after another. Their bodies shuddered. The static inside them flared wildly, but could not move. "Now, Kyle." Kyle slammed both hands down. A 6-pointed magical seal burst open beneath the floorboards in pale blue light. Chains of force shot upward and wrapped around the immobilized creatures, pinning them harder. It worked. For one brief second, it worked perfectly. Too perfectly. I had just begun to exhale when I heard clapping from the far end of the table. Slow, calm, deliberate. Clap, clap, clap. A brilliant plan, Captain. Every nerve in my body locked tight. The whole squad turned. One of our own soldiers was sitting there, smiling. Kyle stared. "What the hell are you doing, David?" The sniper snapped. "Who the hell is Mike?" Another voice from the table said, "Vice Captain." Different names, different identities. Everyone was seeing something different. That was the moment it all lined up in my head. We had boarded the plane with 10 people. But on the plane, there had been 11. I had felt it and failed to grasp it. Something had inserted itself into our formation and bent our minds around its presence. The face of the thing at the end of the table rippled like disturbed water. Blonde youth, bearded soldier, featureless shadow, back and forth in broken flashes. I drew my 6-barrel gun and aimed straight at it. "Null face," I said. It laughed. The sound was sharp enough to hurt. "Finally," it said. "Do you know how difficult it was to get this close to you? I had to move through your previous missions, brush against your people, slip into your routines, all for one little moment of weakness, one little sleep." Its smile widened. "That tap on your shoulder? That finished the curse. Sensory erosion, thought erosion, perception erosion. How can a commander notice one extra wolf among his sheep when his own mind has started to blur?" It snapped its fingers. The room broke. That is the only way I can describe it. Reality did not fade or shift. It fractured. The illusion of the banquet shattered apart. Kyle's chains burst into light fragments. The whole hall dissolved into a warped nightmare of the forest and camp overlapping each other. The creatures we had paralyzed surged back to life, eyes burning bright with blue madness. The static around them expanded, spreading through the trees like a living electrical storm. "End it," Nullface said. Then the slaughter began. "Open fire!" I shouted. Silver rounds ripped through the air. Holy water burst across fur and flesh. Kyle threw hexes. The squad moved exactly as trained. None of it worked. The bullets pierced bodies and vanished into static as though swallowed. Holy water barely made them flinch. One of the static supervisors tilted his head and then lunged fast enough to tear open the sniper's chest before anyone could react. He hit the ground. And then before his body had even cooled, gray-blue tendrils pushed out through the wound. They spread into him, filled him, and pulled him back up. He turned toward us with half his chest gone and smiled Carter's smile. That was when I understood what we were really facing. Not simple undead, not possession, not infection in any normal sense. Assimilation. Anything they killed could become one of them almost instantly. We switched tactics and started using heavy ordnance, enchanted grenades, magnetic shock bombs, consecrated flash charges. Those at least slowed them. If we destroyed a body completely enough, it stayed down. But enough was hard to achieve, and there were too many of them. The line collapsed fast. People died screaming or not screaming at all. Radio channels became nothing but static and broken voices. Through all of it, I kept moving, firing, slashing, barking orders no one had time to follow. I drove a blessed dagger through one werewolf's skull, split another through the ribs, shoved a grenade into the cavity before the thing could knit itself back together, and kicked it away before it exploded. It still wasn't enough. "Boss!" Kyle shouted somewhere to my left. Blood was running from his nose and one eye from magical backlash. "We can't hold this." He looked at me then, and I knew from that look what he had decided. "No," I shouted at him. "Don't you dare, that's an order." He smiled. Then he bit his fingertip open and smeared blood across his own chest in the shape of an eye. My stomach dropped. Forbidden magic. Final tier sacrificial invocation. The kind of thing no sane warlock touches, unless there is nothing left to save. "Kyle, stop." He ignored me. The eye opened. His black hair flashed white in an instant. Life, soul, time, all of it drained into the sigil. The thing on his chest opened fully, and a column of unbearable light erupted outward. It swept through the forest in a massive circle, burning static creatures to powder wherever it touched. For 1 second, everything was white. Then it was gone. Kyle's body crumbled where he stood, collapsing like dry clay. I went to one knee. There was blood in my mouth, and I do not know if it were mine. My vision shook. My chest felt hollowed out. And still it was not enough. From the fog, 3 figures emerged. The Patriarch, Carter, Nullface. Damaged, yes. Hurt, yes, but alive. Healing already beneath layers of crackling static. "You are more troublesome than expected," Nullface said almost casually. The last 2 surviving members of my squad moved in front of me. They did not say much. They did not need to. John, the youngest of us, took his blade and drove it into his own heart before I understood what he was doing. The other followed him a second later. "Go, boss," one of them said as he fell. "Fight for us!" I screamed at them, but it was too late. Their blood hit the ground at my feet. That was when I ripped the iron box from inside my chest rig and opened it. The seals broke with a sound like a breath sucked through teeth. The blood from my fallen teammates lifted in the air as mist and was drawn into the box. So were the last drops from the cuts on my own neck and chest. The enemy rushed me then, realizing too late what I had chosen. The artifact answered. A freezing red-black mist burst from the box and slammed into me. It forced itself into my mouth, nose, wounds, pores, every opening in my body. The pain was beyond anything I had felt before. It was not like burning or stabbing. It felt like millions of tiny saws cutting me apart from the inside, while something older and hungrier than language pushed into the empty spaces. Veins blackened and swelled across my skin. My left arm became numb and then impossibly alive with a foreign kind of force. My own life was being consumed. I could feel that clearly. But in exchange, I was being filled with something violent and impossible. When I looked up again, the whole world had turned blood red. There was no fear left in me then. No strategy, no command discipline, no grief even, only rage so complete it erased everything else. I roared and charged. After that, my memory is mostly fragments. The ground splitting under my feet. Nullface's laughter turning into a scream. Static flesh ripping apart in my hands. My own torn arm spinning away somewhere in the dark. Blood and fire and blue light crashing together until none of it meant anything. Then, nothing. The first thing that brought me back was the sound of a machine. Beep, beep, beep. I opened my eyes to a white ceiling and the smell of antiseptic, the ICU, deep underground in the Bureau Medical Wing. Every inch of my body hurt. Not normal hurt. Ruined hurt. The kind of pain that told you reconstruction had happened where there should have been death. Then I looked at my left side. My left arm had been torn off in the fight. I remembered that much. But there was an arm there now. Or something in the shape of one. Gray-blue static tendrils twisted from the shoulder down, flickering in and out of reality. Tiny sparks crackled along them. When I thought about moving my hand, the tendrils gathered and formed a rough fist. I stared at it for a long time. I could not feel a heartbeat. I could not feel normal warmth in my body at all. I understood before anyone explained it. I had survived, but not cleanly. Somewhere between the artifact, the infection, And whatever happened in the forest, I had become something else. Not fully one of them, not gone in the mind the way the others had been, but no longer fully alive either. The door slid open. The director walked in carrying a stack of files. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. His face had the kind of exhaustion that only comes from signing too many death reports. "Welcome back from the dead, Max," he said. I tried to sit up and failed. My throat felt like glass. "My team?" He did not soften it. He never did. "Dead. All of them. You're the only survivor." The words landed exactly as hard as I expected, and still worse somehow. He set the files on the bed. "And things are getting worse," he continued. "What you found in Black Forest wasn't the main event. It was a sign." I looked at him. "A sign of what?" He tapped the top file. "Escalation. We have reports of gate phenomena in the east. Increased vampire aggression in the north despite suppression operations. Traces of an entity called the Shadow Pastor in Pennsylvania. The static outbreak was not isolated. Something larger is shifting." I looked down at my new arm, at the gray-blue tendrils flexing where flesh should have been. I thought of Cale, of John, of all of them. I tightened my right hand around the hospital sheet until my knuckles hurt. The director watched me for a few seconds, then handed me another file. "Your new assignment. You've been moved to special supervisor status. The Vatican has sent us an asset, experimental, dangerous, human-looking. You will guide it, control it, and make sure it is pointed in the right direction." He stood to leave, then paused and leaned close enough that I could smell tobacco on his coat, even though the cigar in his mouth was unlit. "You won't make the same mistake again," he said quietly, "will you?" Then he left. The door sealed shut behind him, and I was alone with the machines, the files, and the thing that had become my arm. I stared at the papers in my lap. Somewhere out there, the war that killed my team was only beginning. Whatever had touched Black Forest was spreading. The old balance was breaking. And I was still here, half man, half something else, with enough of my mind left to remember every face I had failed. For a long time I sat in that cold white room and listened to the machines. Then I opened the file. If I was still alive or close enough to it, then I would finish this. For Kyle, for John, for all of them. The real war had only just begun.